number one, you always want to have the police come out. Be very careful with this. When you're a passenger, you're obviously oftentimes not involved in that initial conversation between the two drivers, right? You're not one of the drivers. So you're not talking with the other driver, exchanging insurance information, talking about calling the police, that sort of thing. What I recommend that passengers do, because you don't know if they've called or not, especially if they're not in the vehicle with you at the time, right after the wreck occurs, if they're out there talking to the other driver, you don't know what's going on. Call the police. If they've already done it, once you tell them where you're at, what happened, they'll say, okay, we've gotten a number of calls on that. You want to ensure as a passenger that that officer comes out to the scene, because they will then determine who's at fault, which, as we just talked about, could be a very big determination given how much insurance would be available between the Uber Lyft driver being at fault and a third party being at fault. Number two, there might be cameras that normally you wouldn't have in other vehicles. And what I mean by that is oftentimes these Uber Lyft drivers have their phone or a dash cam for this specific reason. Sometimes it's just pointing back to cover them with their exchange with you as a passenger. Still important video because it'll show how you interacted at the time of the collision. Oftentimes they have dash cam pointing out to prove who's at fault. We've gotten that evidence a number of times in these cases. You typically don't have that in an ordinary non-Uber Lyft accident between two people. Is there any video from the driver that he either has set up in the cab or through his phone, through an app or something like that? The other is, what if any in-app surveillance, in essence, was Uber or Lyft doing? A lot of these platforms now, they track the driver's speed, braking, maneuvering, those sorts of things, how often they're touching the screen, that sort of stuff. You want to know, is that what happens? You want to make sure Uber Lyft preserves that kind of information. And then finally, it's proof that you were in the vehicle. For you to be able to have insurance apply, you got to prove you were actually there. Again, it's why first and foremost you want the police to come out, because they'll put you in as a passenger and which vehicle you were in. Otherwise, you also want to make sure you have saved any of your interaction in setting up the ride, paying for the ride. You want to prove you were a paying customer at the time of the wreck. So you want to preserve all of that information in your screen after the wreck, so you know it's there. You don't want to rely on Uber or Lyft to have that information. Get all of that. Those are unique pieces of evidence that you don't normally need or have in a normal car wreck case.